So what to do if violence arises? If violence arises, really, you should feel free to leave the area and walk and remain calm. Don't engage with the violence, is our best advice to folks. And I'm going to let Bill talk about the de-escalation aspects, and we can.
The most important thing that we try to get across from the very beginning, and it really is reinforced by what Louise said, is that we are deeply rooted in the principles of nonviolence, which is both an internal and external process. We understand that when we go out on the street, there's a lot of different ideas, even within our own community, in terms of how to get things done and the messages that we want to bring out. And peacekeepers' role is really, in some ways, to be neutral. We really don't have peacekeepers wear any kind of, insignia in support of a particular cause or what's going on. We often wear white vests to identify ourselves as peacekeepers. And I think there's, it's very important to understand that we're not police and we're not bouncers, and well, we might play the role as marshals and do crowd control in terms of keeping people, particularly if we're in a march situation, safe. Our real role is as de-escalators, and de-escalation is really something that everybody here, everybody who goes out in the street, really can be and should be. We are up against, I think, a level of violence, both in the actions that we're seeing by ICE and by various aspects of the Trump administration and other actors, that we've seen in isolated situations in our history, in the civil rights movement, in the LGBTQ movement, in labor movement, but we've never really seen this concentration of effort. So it means that we really have to rise to this occasion to be peacekeepers and de-escalators everywhere. But I want to go over some of the kind of basic principles that we like to think about in terms of what de-escalation is all about. And I also want to acknowledge something I kind of already said, is that often when we're de-escalating, it's not people who are on the other side who are coming to be counter protesters or to aggravate us and challenge our positions. It's our own people who get too excited, who get too wrapped up in the moment. And we really have to, as brothers and sisters, we're committed to nonviolence and committed to positive social change. We have to be the people that step forward, whether there's a peacekeeper there or not, to be able to step in and try to de-escalate a situation. And that means kind of, first of all, taking care of ourselves, being calm and centered, breathing, being sure that we are in a good frame of mind. We tell the peacekeepers this, is if you get too wrapped up in the particular moment, in a confrontation with someone, and you think you're going over the edge in terms of your anger or your emotional level, we always work in pairs as peacekeepers. So this is time to say to your buddy, hey, I got to step back. So we have to take responsibility for our own emotions and our own feelings. If we didn't feel strongly about these issues, we wouldn't be out in the street. But keeping those emotions contained and not creating a dangerous and escalated situation is everybody's responsibility. Listening is really, really key. We tell peacekeepers that about 80% of what they're doing when they're engaging with someone in a de-escalation situation is to listen to them. Why are they there? What are the things they care about? What are the things that are important for them that have made them come out there? If there's a particular disagreement between 2 or 3 or 4 people, asking one of the people to step aside. Would you come over here? You can say, I really can't hear you. There's just too much noise here. Would you come over here and talk to me? And pull them aside so there's an opportunity for some space and to breathe a little bit and to see what's really going on. That's really key. It's often good, particularly with someone who has very strong opposing ideas, to affirm what it is they're saying. You're not having to agree with them. You don't have, and you know, as a de-escalator or a peacekeeper, we're not there to debate the issues. Clearly, there's some very big differences. Even within our own ranks, there are differences. De-escalation is not the place to do that. Peacekeeping is really about trying to bring things back to the status quo and make sure everybody has a peaceful and positive experience. So, you know, affirming people's beliefs and that they have a right to be out there to express themselves using their First Amendment rights is really, really key. And, you know, being responsive to the things that they're saying. If they're saying that something is making them feel unsafe or they feel like they've done something wrong, it really is important to listen to that and see if there's action you can take or not. What you don't ever want to do is you don't ever want to touch anyone. We have some anti-trans activists. Maybe you've heard of them: Sidewalk Steve and Beth Scare, who wear body cameras. You're always being photographed. People have a right to take your photograph, a video, and record your voice in public. You don't have a right to stop that. You can put your hand up in front of the camera, that's fine. But they do have a right to do that. And as Louise has talked about, organizations that have come out from the far right, media organizations like Breitbart or the Project Veritas, and these, you know, anti-trans activists I just mentioned, will often try to trick people into having interviews or whatever. And be very clear, if you're being photographed or videoed by someone and they're asking you questions and you're going to be put up on social media, and they don't need your permission. So I think it's really, really, you know, difficult to navigate that. But again, you can walk away, and that's what we, you know, suggest people do is to walk away. There is tactically a lot of different things that you're going to do in situations that, you know, there are different points of view on. First of all, let's talk about something we haven't had to deal with very much in the past 4 or 5 months, but has really been a big issue for our peacekeeping over the past several years, which are armed friendlies. People in New Hampshire have the right to either have a concealed weapon or an open weapon, anything up to an AR-15, long rifles, whatever. They're allowed to carry those. They're very intimidating. If you're not a gun person, you're not around guns, they are intimidating just to see. And often these people come with a surly and uncooperative attitude. Don't engage. As Louise said, don't engage them. Understand they have a right to be where they are. We as peacekeepers give them a wide berth, and we keep people, particularly people who want to go up and harass them or call them out for coming with their weapons. We try to move those people away as quickly as possible. We don't need as an escalated situation with someone who has a weapon. This concept of sitting down has been talked about a lot. Our peacekeeping role would never include sitting down. And most of the events that we're talking about for 5051 or No Kings are rallies. There'll probably be speakers, there might be music, whatever. We're not expecting any type of like picket lines or any type of police lines or anything that would kind of put a barrier between us and an opposing side. And so we don't expect the kind of confrontations that you might have at a civil disobedience action, or if you're going to an ICE headquarters or something like that, where, you know, it's a very different dynamic. And so sitting down is we would consider a very inappropriate activity that would put you at a great disadvantage. Many of our peacekeepers are older folks who are in their, you know, 60s, 70s, and some are in their 80s, and getting down on the ground and then getting back up again is, you know, can be difficult. And if you had to try to do that in an emergency or a dangerous situation, it could really be perilous. So, that's a tactic that really you might do in civil disobedience action or something like that, but it's not something that we would recommend at any one of these rallies. As it's been made very clear by everyone at Kent Street, and just kind of understanding that we're in this for a really long slog. And besides being certain that we don't want to get into an armed conflict with the police or with military or anything else, part of what being a peacekeeper is all about, part of what nonviolence is all about, is bringing a certain amount of joy and positivity and humor and the ability to break down barriers. I had an exchange with a guy several weeks ago at a major 50-51 rally in Concord who had a very offensive sign. He was the only counter protester. After spending some time talking to the guy, introducing myself to him and paying attention to his story, I found out he was in deep pain from a back injury. He was a veteran. He had a lot of angst. I didn't talk to him anything about any of the issues that were on his very offensive board or what we were there for. I talked about him. I had an interest in finding out more about why he was there. And I gave him credit for being there to express his First Amendment right. Being a human being to each other, it's hard. It's hard to see the humanity in someone who has a very different and very opposite idea from you, but we have to figure out a way to do that, not only as peacekeepers and as de-escalators at these events, but obviously that's the bigger conundrum for all of us if we're going to ever get through this as a country.
And I do have a couple questions for you from the chat. I do want to just highlight something that you said, because in talking about, as Lynn did and I did, the seriousness of the moment and the seriousness of purpose, that does not mean that every protest is serious. In fact, some of the most effective protests, there are, clowning protests, there are all kinds of ways to turn humor into a really powerful nonviolent tool of nonviolent resistance. You can see that, people like Trump can't tolerate humor. I mean, it's probably the thing that gets most under their skin. So please don't confuse when we're talking about seriousness of purpose with the idea that events can't be fun. We can't do humor. We can't have a range of different types of things that we do. Um, I will just briefly mention, someone asked, there is an event before the main event in Concord that is taking place. It's not part of the No Kings, No Clowns events. It's a organizer whom I do not know. It's about taking back the flag, and stopping the co-opting of the flag by particular groups. It's not seen as a protest, it's seen as a rally. But that's about as much as I can tell people about that. But one of the questions that came up in the chat, because we talk about it in our document as one of the factors to consider about safety, is there a permit for an event? And I just want to be clear that a permit is not always required. It really depends on the space that you're using. If it's a public sidewalk and you're moving, you don't need a permit. If it's, there are a number of situations that do not require permits. When you do a large event at the State House, you are well served to get a permit. And, I'm not sure what the situation is in Manchester or some of the other large venues. Are you able to speak to that at all?
Sure, I will. As much as I can. We always leave that question up to the organizing group that's inviting us in for peacekeeping, but it's something we have a form that we have organizations fill out that gives us basic information. That's always a question we ask. And if you're in a contested situation where you're supposed to have a permit and you don't have a permit, you know, we may still do peacekeeping, but we understand that whatever consequences are going to occur are going to be up to the organizers of that event. At the State House, they have a very clear mandate that you don't go on the State House steps. And the permit for 5051 is also to keep people off the street. So they've done a great job. We twice trained a bunch of their folks, 15 or 20 of their folks, to be de-escalators, basically with the job of working to keep people off the steps or out of the street so they won't get hit by cars. And then that freed up our peacekeepers to really be involved in de-escalation and paying attention to the crowd. So I think it really depends on the organizations. We hope people do their homework around getting a permit, but it's doesn't always happen. And sometimes we had a situation in Nashua where they basically prohibited people from walking on the sidewalk. This is a couple of weeks ago. They wouldn't give them a permit and they wouldn't allow them to walk on the sidewalk, and that's completely illegal. People can always walk on the sidewalk, even if they're holding signs. They don't have to call themselves a march. And I encourage them to not to get arrested, but to march down the street if that's what they wanted to do, because they had a right to do that. So I think, sometimes city officials can be dodgy and can try to, be on a power trip. And so it's really important to be clear about what the law says and what is required, and to do what you want and need to do. And other times you have to, beg for permission or forgiveness, I'm sorry, and instead of begging for permission.
Right. And I think I think you make a really good point that a lot of times a permit simply is not needed. It's not the gauge of whether an event is going to be safe or not. But if it's unpermitted and the police arrive, they usually will declare some sort of statement that you then can attend to. If they say this is an unlawful gathering, if you don't want to get arrested, you probably want to walk away at that point. In terms of prior events leading up to Saturday that have been organized by 5051 and other groups, there have been a few minor incidents, like one person, I think, stepped into the street in Concord. But there haven't been any dangerous situations that I'm aware of, which is not to say that we haven't faced those in the past. There were drag queen shows, story hours, I'm sorry, drag queen story hours at Teetotaler that the neo-Nazis showed up to, and the peacekeepers were essential there in terms of keeping that a peaceful event in the face of some very aggressive um, actions by the neo-Nazis. Um, Again, the goal here is really not to scare people, but protesting does have its own inherent risks. It's not without risk, but you can do a lot to protect yourself from risk by, you know, by really maintaining your situational awareness. Yeah, keep looking around, see if things are developing. Again, go through the decision tree and make your own assessments of where your kind of red lines are, of what you're comfortable with and what you're not.
I'd
Um,
like to say a little bit about one of the comments I see in the chat from Genevieve about being in traffic. First of all, I'm surprised that they can shut down Route 16 for 45 minutes. That's kind of mind-boggling at this time of year. But I think that we have to, as we've seen around the country and around the world, sometimes the most violent stuff happens with people in cars who challenge crowds. And I really think we have to, whether you have peacekeepers or not, be really cognizant of the fact that blocking someone's way or getting too close to their car is really an unwise thing to do, and that it doesn't really win anybody over doesn't really help create a situation, and particularly getting in a back and forth with someone, these big MAGA trucks or whatever, it's just not productive. And this is why we've worked really hard with 5051 to disengage people from going out in the street and just staying to the sidewalk. But our Portsmouth demonstration that's going to be happening on Saturday is going to be at an intersection. And the whole object is to get drivers who are driving by to see the signs and, be visible in that way. But as peacekeepers or as anybody, we really have to, caution people, as Louis says, to be situationally aware. And when the, 4,000 pound piece of metal is going by you at 15 or 20 miles an hour, it's a very dangerous situation. And we can't get too caught up in our emotions to put ourselves at risk and also make a difficult situation for the driver.
Yeah, and we're not able to speak to every protest about whether they're permitted or not. I think that um, we on our list we have some contacts that you can reach out to for individual events to find out more about the event. Um, but I know that for this weekend, particularly that they're during the day, and most of these events are being very publicly um, advertised, I wouldn't get too hung up on the permitting question for this. I think if there's a problem in the moment, you may end up in a situation where the police say, okay, this is not a space you can be. It's dangerous. It's whatever. But I really would not get hung up on the permitting question. You tend to get into issues more like when people just really literally take to the streets and take over the streets. That's where there's no permit, obviously, sometimes there's permitting for parades, but if you just spontaneously take over the street, that's where it gets a little dicier. And that's really, so please don't get hung up on the permitting question for this weekend about whether, as a deciding factor about whether or not that these are safe events to attend. I think the people who are organizing them know their communities and know the places where they are best able to do protesting in their communities. And for most of what I've seen, there are not protests have been held in these locations before. So, Bill.
Well, I just want to have one more kind of mention about the organizers. This is for many of the people I have been working with 5051, they have never done anything like this before. And for many people coming out to these events, they have never done anything like this before. Or it was like the Vietnam War, last time they did anything, or Black Lives Matter a few years ago. But so we have to have a certain amount of grace and flexibility and understanding that we're kind of, I think we said earlier, we're kind of, creating the plane while we're flying it, and understand that we're going to make mistakes at these events, and hopefully they're not serious mistakes. We don't want to have bad interactions with police. We don't want to have bad interactions with counter protesters, but stuff's going to happen. And, to respond to somebody just saw in the chat, we have a very weak bank of pro bono attorneys that can help us. We don't have a National Lawyers Guild chapter here. We don't have very many attorneys that actually would be a resource to us in these kinds of public civil disobedience situations, and something we're really thinking about that, and thinking about working on how do we attract more attorneys who be willing to be pro bono attorneys. But a lot of this is about building our own capacity as a movement to be able to take on more and more provocative and even risky things that are positive, that are making a strong message, and that sometimes are going to bend the legal line, and that stuff, we all have to figure out as we move forward.
And there's so many good questions. We weren't able to get to all of them, but I think that you will find a lot of them will be addressed in the materials that we send out to you. In terms of lawyers, Kent Street does not have a bank of lawyers available. Um, if people are being arrested in a significant way at an event, the ACLU always, I would always recommend calling the ACLU. But you also get a local, I think we were told by the last time at Know Your Rights by the ACLU person who attended was make sure you have a local contact who you can call. And then they can go about the business of trying to, if you are arrested, they can go about the business of trying to find a contact for you. Because often you are only given one local call. So don't waste it trying to call someone where you're going to get a recording or something. So, um, but we hope to sit, we're going to wrap it up here. We thank you all. Sorry we weren't able to get to everyone's questions. We are going to be continuing the series with more, um, you know, many more events regarding building a movement of nonviolent resistance in the face of this authoritarian takeover that we're seeing underway right now. Um, and we'll give history of other movements, and we'll try to really ground it in the theory and philosophy of nonviolence resistance. But what we hope to provide today was some of the tools that you need to keep this event peaceful, keep it safe for you personally, and also to keep it so that the message that we're trying to convey with these events is what people leave with. And we don't want, Saturday evening, we don't want all the news stories to be about how these counter protesters came and co-opted the event. We want it to be about what we're saying, and that is in America. We are not a country with a king. We are a country that is the rule of law. We are a democracy. We are governed by a constitution, and we will not tolerate dictators and kings. So let's let that be the message. Let's show that we're united in that message. And let's make sure that everything we're doing on Saturday is geared toward that message. So, with that, we'll wrap up. And I'd like to thank Bill again. Thank you so much, not only for being here tonight, but for all the amazing work you and the Peacekeepers do, especially the leadership team. I'd like to thank Lynn Painter, Monica Ciaffi, and Susan Chatto and Matt as well, Matt Black, for all of the great work making this program happen. As we said, it was a last minute gathering, so maybe a little less polished than we sometimes might aim for, but our goal was to get the information out to you as best we could. So thank you all for coming. Looking forward to seeing some of you in Concord, and looking forward to seeing all the coverage of the great events across the state. And with that, I guess we'll say good night.